Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to try to answer a question that I get quite a bit in our classes, particularly project classes when we're sewing, either at the shows or even here in the shop. And it's also come up with Claudia with her building her bags and things. She had that question the other day, and I thought, we probably just need to do a video, talk about that just a little bit. I'm not an expert on sewing machines or needle systems or, proper thread ranges that you can run through certain needle sizes and things like that. I'm just going to show you or just tell you what I use in my machines, and then you can kind of go from there. A lot of it boils down to the look of the stitch and what you want to see in that stitch. Some people prefer a little longer stitch length. Some people prefer a little shorter stitch length. If you look at some of the stuff that some of the saddle makers are doing and stuff, there's always kind of a bragging right if you can get that stitch down really, really close, especially on like a candle binder and stuff. And it does look really pleasing. I think a tighter stitch looks more pleasing to me than a longer stitch, but I see a lot of really good quality work done out there online, and it shows to where they're kind of lengthening that stitch out just a little bit for whatever reason. Maybe it's more of a decorative stitch, like something here on this gunslinger belt. You really want to see those stitches. Maybe it's something where it's a colored stitch, like on this bag right here. She used a sea foam color, real light blue colored thread. You really want to see that thread in that project. Traditionally, with building saddles, I don't usually want my stitches to be distracting, and that's why recently, over the last 4 or 5 years, I switched to a natural thread versus the white thread. For years and years and years, all the sewing machines when I apprenticed, as well as in my shop after that, every machine just had white thread in it. That was the only thread that we had. We had a little bit of black and maybe a spool of brown just in case we were repairing something or needed to match a stitch. But in my general work, it was always white stitches. That's just what I used. Nowadays, we're kind of branching out into that. Claudia likes colors. She likes to coordinate the color of the stitch with the project she's doing, or the bag color, or whatever she's doing on that kind of stuff. And I've started playing with that as well. Of course, it leaked into our work as well. So I've done some belts where we've used colored thread to match some paint work we've done on a belt or something like that. You can do a lot of neat things with thread coloring, but usually that would probably be, in my mind, like I said, I prefer my stitch length. If we're just going to talk about that for a second, I prefer my stitches to be fairly tight. I don't want them on top of each other. You can get them too tight to where you're starting to perforate and you can rip through on that. But I want them tight enough to where they're not really long. That's just kind of a habit for me. And but like I said, if you're doing decorative work or something like that and you want to see a little wider thread, that's fine. The times I think that looks good is whenever you're sure that your needle isn't too big for your thread. So whatever thread size you're using, in our shop, we generally run 138. That's going to be what we run inside the Cobra 26. And then we'll also run 207, which is what we run in the Cobra Class 4. So that's just the two thread sizes that I use. I do have 277 if we need it. I find it's a little bit big. As far as needle sizes, on the Cobra Class 26, we're running a size 21 needle. I think they came with 22s as well. I try to keep that needle size as small as I can to where it can actually stitch, right? If you get too small with the thread you're using, it all has to do with that, right? So if you get too small, you might have to drop your thread size down. But I don't want to see a real big hole. When I'm stitching, like this belt right here, if we're stitching that up, I don't want to see a real big hole and a little thin thread in there, a real skinny thread down in there, and you see this big hole where the needle has been. I want that to close up a little bit and really only see the stitches. In my class 4, I run 207 thread, and I'll run anywhere from a 23 needle all the way up to a size 25. On a lot of saddle parts, we're stitching such thick leather that we have to have a heavier needle, because as that needle's passing through that really thick skirting leather, you will get some needle flexion. So that needle wants to move or flex or bend its way through the material, especially if it's an older needle and you don't have as sharp a point on it as it needs to have. It will try to bend, and that's when it can hit the plate underneath your work and break, or put a burr on it or something like that, and that can cause a lot of issues. So, but when I step up, I don't change the thread size, right? So a size 25 needle with a 207 thread might be just a little bit big of a needle for this thread, but in that thick of work, that material is so heavy that needle, the hole closes up pretty good when we're done, and I'm stitching close enough that you really don't notice it quite as much. Now, if I'm going to sew a belt, because I will sew a lot of belts on the Class 4, I sew them with the same 207 thread, but I'm going to drop the needle size down to 23, which leaves a much smaller hole, and that thread will fill that hole up really nicely, and the stitches look real nice. And on the Class 4, you can also run 138. You can run different thread sizes through both of those machines. I could probably run 207 in the Class 26, but I need to step the needle up a little bit, maybe do a 22 or something like that. But for us in the shop, for ease of use and that kind of thing, and not messing with the tensions very much on a machine, I don't change the size of the thread at all in either one of my machines. The big machine, the Class 4, it runs 207. The Class 26 runs 138. We don't switch that, because when you switch that, sometimes you've got to adjust that tension a little bit, because now you've got a smaller or larger thread in that machine, so you might have to make some adjustments. I'd prefer to just leave that alone. Now, we do change the colors pretty frequently, and that's not going to pose any kind of issue, but it's just something that you got to be careful with. Now, if you guys have been here on this channel for quite some time, you remember we used to sew a lot on the Singer 3115, which is a boot top machine, more of a lighter weight leather type machine. I don't remember the needle size in that machine because it's been so long, but at that time we were running size 92 thread in that, and that is a very small thread. Like I said, the smallest we're running now in the shop for this time, when this video is being made, is 138, and so that was 92, and it's a pretty small thread. It works really well, the size needle that was in that machine, for sewing up little card pockets, things like that, wallet interiors, all that kind of stuff. We still have that machine. It runs fine. I just don't have space for it in the shop anymore, and so we just don't have it in here, but we will bring that back out, because I do like having that for smaller projects. The whole deal is, when you're talking about thread size and how long should my stitch length be, or what's a good deal, there is no hard and fast rule on that. It's more of an eye thing. It's more of a what is pleasing to you. What do you want your work to reflect? Historically, or just generally, looking out into the market and kind of looking, the wider the stitch or the longer the stitch, the cheaper it kind of looks. And that's not to say that if your stitch is long and you prefer that, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying just in general, the perception. So the tighter the stitch. So if you look at a lot of the high-end museum pieces that the TCA does, or that you look at, somebody's work at like say the World Leather Debut or whatever, especially on saddles, a lot of people will comment on how tight those stitches are. And it's just more of a craftsmanship kind of flex right there, right? You're showing that you can run an awl, you've got your awl honed in just right, that you can run those stitches very close together. The thing you got to remember, the closer and closer they get, in a way, kind of sometimes it can start to cause some issues, because now your holes are so close, they're going to, over time, as that leather ages, you can have some issues down the road. But from a quality standpoint, it perceives more value. But that's not to say that you can't lengthen them out a little bit for other things, or for a stylistic thing or something like that. So I just try to, usually I have an eye that I want to see my stitches at. And so we've had, just recently had the belt class, and I had a gentleman ask me, what number stitch, what are you setting your machine to on? I don't even know the numbers on the machine. And so I just kind of, if I'm worried about it, I'll get a piece of scrap leather, I dial it in, and we'll sew some, and I'll look at the stitch. If it doesn't look pleasing to me, I'll tighten it down or I'll loosen it up, depending on what I'm doing. Because also in saddles, the thicker the leather that I'm sewing on the Class 4, sometimes I have to lengthen that stitch out to keep that stitch looking similar to everything else, just because the material is so heavy that at a certain distance, they actually look smaller because of the thickness of the material. It's just kind of an eye thing. You just kind of find your feel of where you want to be and what you want to see. Again, I don't think as anything, if you're putting a stitch every ½ inch, that's probably way too wide. One thing is, the longer the stitch, the quicker you'll sew it, the less thread you're going to use, that kind of thing. But the closer you stitch, obviously, the more thread you're going to end up using. But you just got to kind of gauge that in there and find something that you like. If you see people's work, and maybe ask them, what length are they doing? A lot of people will monitor that and say, I'm 10 stitches per inch. I don't know the number. I'm just looking looking at what it looks like on that particular project. And there are some times on projects where I will adjust that. We do have a video on stitch relief. And so like what stitch relief is what we're talking about from the outer edge of your work. Where does your stitch need to be? Most of the time, I'm going to put that somewhere in the neighborhood, an 1/8 inch to like a 3/16, something like that. You're gonna come inside there just a little bit. I have a video showing that how we kind of figure that out, but it's usually dependent on how thick your material is. I always, as a rule of thumb, try to say, you know, stitch inside a little bit further than you think you might need it to be, because a lot of people will stitch right there on the edge, real close to the edge, and then you have to come by with a really tiny edger when you go to do your edges. If you watch that edging video, we do talk about that stitch relief in there, and you need to leave yourself room to go with the appropriate size edger on your material when you go to do that. And so if you're stitching too close to the edge, you're not gonna be able to do that. You're gonna have to drop the edger size down, and that's not gonna be enough of an edger, and you'll get that squared off edge look. You see that a lot online where people will stack that leather up and they end up with a square edge because they're going, you know, it may be, say it's a 3/8 of an inch thick or 1/4 inch thick piece of all this material laid up, and then they'll go in with like a double lot edger and just pull off this little wispy thing of edge. You need to take off more to round that edge off, and in order to do that, you've got to move your stitch line in some. So don't be scared to stitch a little bit further in than you may think you need to be, and go back and watch those videos. That'll help you too. But I hope that helps. It's just something real quick just to talk about the thread, like I said, mainly on the sewing machine side, because a lot of people they're worried about, am I sewing at the right? There is no hard and fast rule, just whatever you think looks good. But I will say somewhere in that midline, you know, not too tight where you're just stacking those stitches, you can barely even see the thread because you got the holes so close together, and not so long where you can stick a pencil underneath each stitch because they're so far apart. You want to be able to have a nice stitch that looks pleasing, and again, it depends on what you're doing. Gunslinger stitches, especially on suede or some materials like that, you may want to lengthen those out just a little bit so you actually see the pattern on there and things like that. So hope that helps. Just something real quick, talk about that. If you have questions about needle systems, what size needle, and then what's my range of thread that I can successfully use with that needle, be sure and call Leather Machine Co. That's where I get all of my thread, mainly because we're at the show. He's got a thread rack there. Claudia, go over there and get a few different colors she didn't have and some colors that I need because we're out of, and she'll just go grab those threads there. But Weaver sells thread. Springfield, I'm sure, sells thread. I'm sure Maker's Leather Supply sells thread. A lot of people out there sell sewing machine thread. Just play with it, experiment, throw some thread in your machine, run it on some projects, see what you think, adjust the stitch length, have fun with it. Don't be scared of it. It's not a hard and fast rule. There's no mathematics somebody's doing when they're looking at your work to see if you use the proper thread length. So hope that helps, and we'll see you guys in the next video.